Right, welcome to Radical Feminist Perspectives. Today we are going to discuss Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, discussed by Lierre Keith, Marian Rutigliano and me, Joe Brew. You can chat, there's a chat function, we've got transcript, and I hope you enjoy it.
So this book, Silent Spring, if you've never heard of this book, that is very sad. You should know about this book. Rachel Carson is the person who is credited with being the mother of the environmental movement. Before Silent Spring, nobody had ever presented the public with this kind of information and with this kind of perspective that said, we are actually waging a war against the planet with these chemicals, and we are doing tremendous damage to the web of life by doing this. At that point, everybody was so excited about, modern technology and what a great future we all were going to have, and we were going to be driving spaceships, and we were going to conquer all diseases, and there was this very hopeful idea that human ingenuity and human science were going to make all things possible to all people, and it was a very optimistic time. And then Rachel Carson came along and said, we are paying a terrible, terrible price with this technology, with these chemicals, and the all of life is under attack now from what's happening. And the public had never heard anything like this before. She was also a really beautiful writer. She was almost entirely self-taught in what she was doing. She had studied marine biology, but she went on to teach herself all of this chemistry so that she could understand the science, so she could understand what was happening to the world, because she saw it and she was really horrified by it. And so a lot of her friends, they saw what was coming. The book was published in 1962. It was serialized in the New Yorker, and it just made an explosion across the culture. And a lot of her friends could see the price she was going to pay for it. And in a letter that she wrote to one of her friends who was wondering, like, why are you doing this to yourself? This was her quote: "There would be no peace for me if I kept silent." And I think that really shines through in her work. And I think that's one of the reasons that we all love her, is that we recognize that in ourselves, that we are not women who can keep quiet when we see this kind of wrongdoing happening, when we see these terrible, terrible things that nobody wants to talk about. She broke the silence on what was happening to the planet. And after she had cancer herself. So they said that the chemical industry mounted this enormous campaign against her, and people had never seen the like of that either, that they had like a huge dossier against her, and they tried to find every piece of dirt that they could on her to try to discredit her. And she ended up testifying twice in front of Congress about her work. The Kennedy brothers were quite interested in what she was, what this book meant, like, what was this true? What could we do about it? So she ended up testifying twice, and all of the commissions backed her up. It's like, she's right, nothing in here is actually wrong. But she paid a terrible price for it. And the whole time that she was testifying, it was 1962, she had cancer, and she knew it. So she was dying during those commissions. But you can still see the footage of her testimony, and she just carries herself with incredible dignity under the whole thing. And so she's just a wonderful, a foremother, a foresister. She was also a lesbian. A lot of people don't know that. One of the things that they threw at her was that, oh, she's a spinster, and therefore she must be, and I'm not exaggerating, a communist, was what they tried to say about her. And in fact, neither of those things was true. She was a lesbian, though. And what else can I say? It's just a beautiful book, and if you've never read it, you should. Her native biophilia, her love for all life, really, really does shine through here. So
I'm going to jump in here now and say that we have Marian Rutigliano here, who's an expert, and me, who's not an expert, but has read the book as well. And Marian, just so you know, I've been turning you on mute a bit because you've got a cough. So it just, if you're not speaking, just mute. No, now you're muted. So unmute yourself.
Apologize.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's right. So Marian, why do you think the book's good, and your introduction to the book. Why is it an important, and why are we having it on Radical Feminist Perspectives?
No, I mean, hadn't been done before. My mother brought this book home when I was, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old. And you know, when it first came out. And I read it back then, did not understand much of it, but I read it back then and I never forgot it. And people who read it say that they never forgot it, even if they don't remember all the chemistry, even if they don't remember all the toxicology, even if they don't remember everything. What they do remember is that really awful things are happening, which she documented very, very well. I mean, she talks about chemistry, she talks about toxicology, she talks about some really complicated stuff that people remember. And there were a lot of people who became you know, environmental scientists back in the 60s because of Rachel Carson. When I was in a PhD program in environmental engineering, the older professors said that they read Silent Spring and would assign it in some classes. So it had a tremendous impact. And you know, like people at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory who work in the work in the space program say that Star Trek was something that inspired them. People in the environmental movement, us older people who were around, you know, early in the early days, will talk about Silent Spring and say, yeah, I read it when I was, for me, it was 7 or 8 years old. For other people, it may have been high school or college. So it had never been done before. And it was done so well that people went, oh my God, I can't believe this is really happening. And there's so much in here that we look back at now in terms of how things work politically, that we can see she was so, I mean, she was like Cassandra, a prophet.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in there. That I think, I don't know if we've said it's 1962 that she wrote it.
Yeah.
She she references almost everyone she references is a male scientist, is a man, and all the studies she references are men. And she talks about men's choices and men's violation of the planet and men's imperative to kill all the insects, which is actually rather pleasing because she blames men for it. So it's this pseudo-generic, but she's using the language that was normal at the time, and there had not been a strong feminist movement. And she is, I think it never really says any feminist analysis apart from a whole analysis of ecology and the damage done by men to the planet is a radical feminist analysis. And her call for us to see the interconnectedness and our place as part of nature, not a dominating violator of nature, is radical feminist. So it's interesting reading it, and if you read it, it's so pertinent for today because her insights into what the scientific establishment, the political establishment, and big pharma are doing are absolutely, it's the same structure. They're doing the same thing now with transgender ideology as they did then, and she blew it all apart, but without using feminist, radical feminist language per se. Okay, back to you, Lierre.
So can you see the second slide?
Yeah.
Oh, good, because I couldn't get it to work for a second. So this is what I call the patriarchy violation imperative. And this is, you know, the main problem with the psychology of men under patriarchy is that they have to violate everything. They've set themselves up as against other creatures. And the problem is, you know, when you have that kind of an ethic of control, there's always another wild being that has to be dominated. You're never gonna, it's a bottomless pit. Like you're never going to be done. Every time you look around, there's going to be some other self-willed creature that you have to get under control. So it's endless. You know, it's not a psychology that leads to anything like a fulfilling life or, you know, real intimacy or, you know, just a good relationship with other beings, because you always have to just dominate everything. So this was a quote from Silent Spring. The most alarming of all man's assaults upon the environment is the contamination of air, earth, rivers, and sea with dangerous and even lethal materials. This pollution is for the most part irrecoverable. The chain of evil it initiates, not only in the world that must support life, but in living tissues, is for the most part irreversible. In this now universal contamination of the environment, chemicals are the sinister and little recognized partners of radiation in changing the very nature of the world, the very nature of its life. So the patriarchy, the violation imperative has gotten all the way down into our DNA, is what she's saying, that it's as bad as radiation and that it's changing the genetic code, and it's basically forever. So these chemicals accumulate in our bodies. We can never get rid of them. They accumulate in the environment, and on anything but a geologic timescale, they're going to be there forever. I mean, at this point, there's not a creature on Earth that doesn't have these chemicals in their bodies, and it's like from the Arctic all the way to wherever. Like there's no way to get away from it. You've got, endocrine disruptors, you've still got DDT everywhere. And these chemicals have never existed before. She talks about how we'll get into this, but the chemical industry was something that was really brand new. Like we'd only had a few decades of it at this point, and everybody thought it was this wonderful thing. We had all these great inventions, and she was the one who really said, we're getting down into the very stuff of life. I mean, they'd only just discovered the double helix. It's like, and we're fucking with it essentially by having these chemicals. So this is definitely the patriarchy, the violation imperative, all the way down. Marian, do you want to jump in?
It was really common. People think that, where did you actually come across this stuff? When I was a kid, in the suburbs in New York, they used to spray. The trucks used to come around and spray, just spray all the vegetation everywhere. And it was, it was late 50s, early 60s, and it was DDT. So there was a whole huge swath, generation of people who were exposed to these chemicals. And I don't, we all thought it was a good thing because these insects can carry diseases and destroy these carefully planted trees in suburbia. And no one is saying that that we shouldn't do something about people who get insect-borne diseases that can be fatal or that can be really, really damaging. Nobody's saying that, but wholesale spraying of like huge neighborhoods, millions of people, just because we don't want the linden tree in the front yard to have an insect infestation. I don't know how to justify that.
Yeah, and she talks about the Dutch elm disease and how all of the efforts to try to stop, whatever the Dutch elm disease problem, it just ended in just millions of dead birds. Like that's all that happened. They weren't able to stop it, even with all of these horrible chemical interventions. And she goes through example after example. It's like every time they try, they're just bringing essentially a chemical sledgehammer at the problem and breaking everything that they come across. And so, everybody watched it, that there were no more robins the next year. And so she goes through all these different examples of, and there was things that people were witnessing, but nobody had really put into words yet, because everybody across the country certainly saw the end of the birds every time they tried one of these programs. And then you could see that it didn't even work. So, nature.
I think also there was a lot of denial from the establishment. So people would complain to their local councils or to the government and to the scientists and say, this seems to be happening. We're getting this result. And there was incredible gaslighting by the establishment. And a lot of people knew what was going on, but decided for their own careers to not speak about it. And they were almost all men, scientists and government officials at that time. And so it's fantastic, as a woman, she just felt she had to do something. Whereas there are loads and loads of men who could have talked about it and could have put a stop to it, but they didn't.
And we had an example. We'd already had an example of why this didn't work. It's a book called American Chestnut, which talks about we have no more chestnuts in the United States. When European settlers first came here, 1/3 of the trees east of the Mississippi were chestnut trees, and they were a huge source of food and of wood. I mean, just of everything. And we have no more chestnut trees. And what became clear was that Okay, some chestnut trees would get decimated or killed off by you know an infestation that was brought from outside of the United States that was not native to here. And rather than just allowing nature to take its course, kill off the chestnut trees that were susceptible and let the others survive, developing resistance, they would cut down and set on fire millions and millions of chestnut trees, so that in the United States there are no more chestnut trees. There may be a few here and there that develop, for 7, 8, 9 years, but never ever develop chestnuts. So we already knew, what happened when you do this kind of massive interference, and try to engineer and force things the way you want, especially with monocultures and things and so forth.
Yeah. So with the invention of these synthetic biocides, and it's just important to remember, these chemicals don't exist in nature. They were a creation of laboratories, especially during the Second World War. So they don't exist except that we create them. So with the invention of these chemicals, patriarchal science has violated, and these are just the chapters of her book, the surface waters, the water table, which she calls the underground sea, the soil, the bodies of plants, which she calls Earth's green mantle, the bodies of insects, birds, mammals, the entire biological kingdom of Animalia, the air, and then the genetic code, so life itself. All of this is under threat from these synthetic chemicals. And so that's really the main message of the book, is like, okay, we've done this thing and there's a terrible price that's being paid across the planet. And if we keep at it, God knows where it's going to end, because imagining a world without birds and without any of these things is a pretty horrible thing. And will life itself survive if we keep doing this? So that, I mean, it was really a clarion call to action when she wrote this book. So, and so necrophilia as the endpoint of sadism. So this is Eric Fromm's insight about, the nature of the sadist. And he's somebody who certainly knew and wanted to understand, why people did completely horrifying things like become Nazis and kill millions of people, or Stalin. So, all of his work was trying to figure out the psychology behind this. And I think he's very interesting to read as a radical feminist, because he's pretty much most of the way there. But anyway, I mean, this is really his point, is that sadism is always, the end of it is necrophilia, is when you have complete control over another being. It's the point really is to kill them eventually. That's where it's going to end. And she doesn't use exactly those words, but that's this really the point of the whole book. So this industry is a child of the Second World War. So right away, you've got war. You've got this massive slaughter going on across continents. In the course of developing agents of chemical warfare, some of the chemicals created in the laboratory were found to be lethal to insects. This discovery did not come by chance. Insects were widely used to test chemicals as agents of death for man. And I just found that so chilling. Like Marian, I read this book when I was a very young child. My parents had a hardback copy on the bookshelf. She was held in real reverence in my family. If anybody mentioned her name, it was like, oh, Rachel Carson, like everybody knew she was this wonderful person. And I didn't really remember, and it certainly had an impact on me. I can't say that I remembered much about it, in the reread now, all these years later. So I don't remember reading this when I first read the book, but rereading it last week, just the horror of this, just thinking about how many thousands of these little creatures must have been used in these experiments during World War II to find just the most wretched use of our brains, to figure out ways to kill people in dreadful torture, essentially, by spraying them with these hideous, man-made chemicals. All I could think about was the poor insects that they're using. Like, God, these poor creatures. And they don't usually make a noise, so they can't even scream, like the whole thing just seems so sadistic and hideous to me. And I didn't know this. So I'm just sharing the trauma here, people.
Yes. So I'll jump in. One thing, Lierre, is sometimes probably take down the slides, because it just gets sort of boring. Okay. To have the slide up all the time. Maybe just don't have it up the whole thing. Sure. Lierre's very kindly showing the slides today, if it's possible. But if not,
figure out how. It's all right. I'll figure it out. I think I do. end screen, maybe.
Yeah,
And you
end
keep,
screen
you
share.
keep talking.
I'll keep going. And if it doesn't work, so be it. The point I was very struck by at the beginning of Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, she says that there were a load of aeroplanes left after the Second World War, and she explains how they had developed the pesticides, the synthetic pesticides, man-made, and she uses that term a lot. She explains that they were left over, so they had to do something with them, and they used them on American. First of all, it was state land. It was the land owned by the government and by state institutions, and then they started going over into agricultural land, and then into public land, into just normal public spaces, into cities, into suburbia, and I'm just going to do the stop sharing thing. It says, I've just stopped it, Lierre, so it's just, it's okay.
I couldn't figure it out, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, it's okay. We're gradually all going to become tech wizards.
Wizards.
But, so Rachel Carson really clearly says they are using the planes that were used in the Second World War for murder, for killing people, the chemicals that they developed in the Second World War for genocide. She doesn't say genocide, but she says that these are the things they're using. They're turning it on America, and some people are making a huge amount of money out of it, but lots of people are getting jobs and are happy to go along with it. And then that links up to one bit where there was a time when some people called for a halt to the spraying because it was killing people. There were kids who went into sprayed lands, and there were loads of animals, loads of insects, loads of birds, but human beings were dying, particularly the young. And they called for the state, for the spraying to stop. And the government said it was too difficult to stop it because of they had signed the permits for it. So they knew people were dying, and they carried on, and they said, we want further evidence. We don't have enough evidence to know. And what Carson says is, so they were experimenting on humans. They had been told people are dying, this is a disaster, and they refused to stop it, and they carried on for another year. And that's very much happening now. We're saying people are being massively harmed, and the authorities are saying we don't have enough evidence. So it's experimentation on people. That's a thing I got, and she was very clear about that.
Yeah, I mean, we have this concept now, the precautionary principle, but that really comes directly out of her work, that you shouldn't do these things if you can't say for sure that it's not going to hurt anything. And that should be the fallback position, is if you don't know this isn't going to create massive harm, you have no right to do it to the rest of us and to the planet. So, her work is absolutely sort of a forerunner to that idea that environmentalists still hold to. So.
Yeah, somebody in the chat says, first do no harm. The precautionary principle is a medical principle. And, it's just first do no harm. When the Environmental Protection Agency was first begun, and there was, talk of regulating toxic chemicals, there was a program, the Toxic Substances Control Act, and the chemical companies there were tens of thousands, I don't know, something like 68,000 or whatever chemicals that were in commercial use, that were just put on that list of like acceptable chemicals to use with absolutely no testing, with the proviso that if a company wanted to test its chemical to see if it was toxic, they could go on ahead and do that, and then it would be regulated. But I mean, none of them did that. So here was like 68,000 chemicals that were just without any testing, without anything, just automatic, because we were already using them. We're okay, fine, you can keep using these chemicals. That's not the precautionary principle. That's the exact opposite. And I'm a physician as well, and I've told other physicians about this. It's like, and they're like, well, wait a minute, shouldn't it be the other way around, where unless you know it's safe, you shouldn't get to use it? Well, yeah.
And Carson is very detailed. It's very, very interesting. She talks about the testing, and at the time running up to 62 when she wrote the book, a lot of the testing was on one chemical, on one animal. over a short period of time. So there was no testing on the mix of chemicals, the fact that people, human beings and animals and insects were being exposed to a series of different chemicals which joined together and acted differently. None of that. We know that's still happening, but they were being given licenses based upon short-term tests of one simple at quite a low dose. And then that was theoretic, was said to be safe. So she's very clear about that as well, about the complexity and that everything's interconnected and things build up over time.
Should we go to the next slide?
Yeah, so the next one is a quote from
Are you doing it or am I doing it?
You're doing it, okay. And you're doing it really well. And I think it needs to go on to the next one. Yeah.
All right, here
Brilliant.
we go.
Okay, so this is a quote from the book, page 105. Who has decided, who has the right to decide for the countless legions of people who are not consulted that the supreme value is a world without insects, even though it be also a sterile world ungraced by the curving wing of a bird in flight? The decision is that of the authoritarian temporarily entrusted with power. He has made it during a moment of inattention by millions, to whom beauty and the ordered world of nature still have a meaning that is deep and imperative. You can see that it's so beautiful and so moving. I mean, it's stunning. She's a stunning writer, and it's very, very sad, but it's wonderful to read. And perhaps can we move on to the next one as well, because then we can see her Rachel Carson's writing. The next two slides do this as well.
It's not advancing and I don't know why.
Yeah, I think if you click on it, it should show a little button.
And clicking and nothing is moving.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, I see. Maybe. What about at the top right-hand corner? Oh no, top. No, that's not it. Click in the bottom left-hand side. It might work.
There we go. I don't know what happened, but it works. So go ahead.
There's some weird little arrows that appear. I think they just try to make this very difficult for us, but okay. So next one. During the autumn and winter, the salmon eggs, large and thick-shelled, lay in shallow gravel-filled troughs or redds, which the mother fish had dug in the stream bottom. In the cold of winter, they developed slowly, as was their way. And only when spring at last brought thawing and release to the forest streams did the young hatch. At first, they hid among the pebbles of the stream bed, tiny fish about half an inch long. They took no food, living on the large yolk sac. Not until it was absorbed would they begin to search the stream for small insects. And then possibly, if we could go to the next one, and then again, it just shows her under. It's so beautiful and so sad. It's just really sad reading this, because she saw something that we don't see, because so much of it has been destroyed. By the autumn of that year, so many dead fish had been found in the Yellowstone River that sportsmen and Montana Fish and Game administrators became alarmed. In one 300 yards length of shoreline, 600 dead fish were counted, including brown trout, whitefish, and suckers. Stream insects, the natural food of trout, had disappeared. And I mean, as well as it being an insight into the beauty that she witnessed and people, first half of the 20th century saw in the States, there's this point that she's using the sportsmen and the fish and game administrators who were alarmed. That counts in this patriarchal world where men want their sport. And she does do that quite a lot. She refers to male values and the way that men want to control nature and have that access to their tormented games, etc., being valid people. And she, to be honest, barely mentions the impact on women. But it's still fantastic book. Do
you want me to read the big one?
Yeah, you do, yeah.
Okay. I can't quite see the top of the screen, so oops, sorry, go back one. Some 10,000 acres of sage Well, anyway, the Forest Service went in and they killed all the sagebrush. But so was the green life-giving ribbon of willows that's traced its way across these plains, following the meandering streams. Moose had lived in these willow thickets, for willow is to moose as sage is to the antelope. Beaver had lived there too, feeding on the willows, felling them, and making a strong dam across the tiny stream. Through the labor of the beavers, a lake backed up. Trout in the mountain stream seldom were more than 6 inches long. In the lake, they thrived so prodigiously that many grew to 5 pounds. Waterfowl were attracted to the lake also, merely because of the presence of the willows and the beavers that depended on them. But with the improvement instituted by the Forest Service, the willows went the way of the sagebrush, killed by the same impartial spray. When Justice Douglas visited the area in 1959, the year of the spraying, he was shocked to see the shriveled and dying willows, the vast, incredible damage. What would become of the moose, of the beavers, and the little world they had constructed? A year later, he returned to read the answers in the devastated landscape. The moose were gone, and so were the beaver. The principal dam had won out for one of attention by its skilled architects, and the lake had drained away. None of the large trout were left. None could live in the tiny creek that remained, threading its way through a bare, hot land with no shade remaining. Where no shade remained, the living world was shattered. So this just is a stand-in for every kind of one of these interventions where, you take out the trees and that's the end of the stream, and then it's the end of the animals, and then, everything, you're just left with a desert. And this is what's happened the world over. And I just thought this was such a beautiful retelling of just step by step, how all of these creatures are interconnected, how they all depend on each other. Every one of them makes a change to the landscape, but that change just brings more life. It brings more diversity, more complexity. Beavers do this incredible thing. They create wetlands, and wetlands are the most species-dense habitat on the planet. So without the beavers, you don't have wetlands, because that's what they do, is they slow the water and they slow the transfer of energy across the landscape by doing that. And because they slow it down, it means so many other uncountable other creatures can now use that water. They can make homes in it, they can use it for themselves before it trickles down to the next. And there's descriptions of what it used to look like in the Northeast here in the United States because there were beaver. There really weren't free-flowing streams the way we have now, because every one of them was dammed. But there were like cities of beaver. Like you could go 100 miles and it would just be beaver dam after beaver dam after beaver dam, which meant it was just like these beautiful marsh meadows everywhere, which of course the moose could live in. There's all these creatures that only live there. And now they have nowhere. There's nowhere for them. They're all gone. So, and there's the beaver thing is interesting because there's a lot of the Native American religious belief is that and this is interesting because it's sort of what we know about the beginning of the universe is that there's this, like the Big Bang. So there's this energy, suddenly this flow of energy, but it can't form anything yet. And so in the cosmology, it's the beaver that's like this sacred being who builds a dam essentially for that original flow of energy, and it's able to slow it down enough that then life can happen. And because of beaver's activity, the stars form, the planets form, and then life happens. And that, take out the character of beaver, but that is what happened in the universe to make the planets and the stars and everything. Like we did have that at the beginning of time. And so beaver is the creature, the mythological creature who made all life possible. And if you look out across the Northeast, 300 years ago, that was true. The beavers made the landscape and they made all that life possible. And here, in one season, these horrible chemicals are able to destroy all of it.
The wetlands, there's two other, they're called, ecological services. And I really hate that expression, but there's two other things wetlands do. One is they prevent flooding. The flooding in New Orleans from Hurricane Katrina all those years ago would not have been nearly as bad had the original wetlands still been there. So that's number one. Number two is plants take up toxins. Plants take up toxic materials, and they do it in several different ways. Sometimes they break down the toxic material, including some heavy metals. Sometimes they just simply hang on to it and it stays in the plant. You harvest the plant and the and you get rid of the toxic material. So there's two really, really important things that wetlands do that just, aren't there anymore because there's so few wetlands now.
Yeah, and Katrina, one of the interesting things was there was a lot of people who didn't leave because they said, well, we've been through a category 4 before. It wasn't that bad. We can do it. And what they didn't understand was that, yeah, they had 20, 30 years ago been through the same level hurricane, but they had wetlands then. They had enough wetlands that there was a buffer. And by the time Katrina came around, it was all gone. So the impact of that storm was going to be dramatically worse. And that was the thing that just the average people had no idea. They were in for something that had never been seen before because the wetlands were gone. Okay, go back to screen share. There's probably a more elegant way to do this, but this is all I know in terms of the screen sharing business. Okay, back to this.
I think it's so difficult screen sharing to get it working. So I don't know anybody who can do it. Maybe that could be our next project as radical feminist perspectives, learning how to screen share really well.
There has to be a way to go back and forth between us talking and us showing slides that doesn't involve going back to the beginning, but I don't know what it is. Anyway.
No, and I don't know. I mean, I've been doing it for ages and I still can't do it. Anyway, look, this one. This is from page 133. Never has any pesticide program been so thoroughly and deservedly damned by practically everyone except the beneficiaries of this sales bonanza. Carson could really see that the people who were promoting it were the pesticide companies, the chemical companies, and also the people who wanted to use money for the planes. So the planes that had been created for the Second World War were not being used, so put them to use. And so she was saying that, and then she completely said that complicit in it were the governments, sort of at various different levels, and in fact the media, who didn't talk about what was going on and kept reassuring people, saying it's completely safe, it's absolutely fine. So it took this huge whistleblowing from the bottom up, but by her who had the ability to write. So she was saying that the grassroots, most people could see that it was absolutely wrong, but the beneficiaries of the sales bonanza, who are making money from it, managed to, well, were in control. And the brilliant thing that she did, and very, very inspiring, is she wrote this unbelievably powerful book, which actually changed things. So so whilst it's quite depressing reading the book, and as well as it being beautiful, the impact of it and that it did affect change. But maybe Marian and Lierre can say exactly how much change it affected. It certainly made the public aware. Yeah.
Well, one thing that it did do in terms of changes, I mean, if a company wants to, bring at least in the United States, if a company wants to bring a pesticide into commercial use, I mean, there's a lot of testing they have to do. They have to do all this testing on the chemistry, the composition of it, chemical characteristics. They have to test. It's called environmental fate. What happens when the pesticide is exposed to water, to light, to anything else, and they have to do this laundry list of studies, acute, subacute, and chronic studies. Like, what are the effects acutely? Like within a day or two of being exposed. What are the effects within a couple of months, and what are the effects long term, 6 months and longer? They have to do studies on effects on aquatic organisms, algae, the little tiny invertebrates the fish eat, and fish itself. And these, I mean, on the flip side of it, these studies cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So when the company does this stuff, they really do not take kindly to being told this is just way too toxic. And that's where the political process comes in, and that's that's a whole another issue. Go ahead, Lierre. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
She, this book really did kick off the environmental movement. There was nothing like it before. There wasn't a movement about this before Rachel Carson. And, you know, by 1972, which was, you know, 10 years after, we got the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and the Endangered Species Act, which are still, you know, the main ways that people try to protect. That's the legal sort of foothold that you can use to try to protect a place or a species. And it's odd to think that Richard Nixon was the most environmental president we've ever had, but that is the case. That was what we got under Nixon. And really, it was because there was a movement that forced him to do this. But those are still, you know, it's the main legal arm of the environmental movement is based on those bits of legislation. And that is just directly from Rachel Carson. She's the one who got that moving, got everybody awakened to how bad this was. And I will say, you know, in my lifetime that her work on DDT and trying to save the birds has had an impact. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember, you know, learning about all of this, and people were really afraid for the bald eagles because that's, you know, the national bird. It's supposed to be a symbol of the United States, and everybody knew that they were going down, that we weren't going to have any left. And it's, you know, the DDT made their shells really soft, so they couldn't, their young died. So there were almost none of them left. And then, you know, the book comes along and they stop spraying DDT everywhere, and they're able to recover enough that now, I mean, even just where I live, there are days when I look up and there are bald eagles just flying over my land. You never saw that when I was a kid. And I remember when I was 30 years old, the first time I saw a bald eagle. And now I mean, they're not like super common, but you can see them. You don't have to go into vast wilderness areas to see bald eagles. You can just see them like in regular places sometimes. And they're amazing birds. I mean, they're huge. They're absolutely massive birds. And their nests are like 12 feet across. Like, you don't even understand what you're seeing when you look up in a tree. Like, what is that huge mess in the top of that? It's like, that's a bald eagle nest. That's what it's supposed to look like here. So it's an amazing thing. And it's, you can't not just have this gladness in your heart that like somebody saved these birds. And the same with the California condor. Like there's birds that are only here that are left as a species now because of Rachel Carson's work. So she got it done.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add there that I work as a gardener on Fridays, and I have worked as a gardener for some time. For a while, I worked full time, and I'm actually a qualified pesticide applicator. So I have the legal ability. So I know what the rules are in Britain. I never use pesticides myself. Like I almost never did, but just for getting jobs, it's useful to have done it. But the sad thing in Britain, and I think in a lot of countries, is whilst there is very good regulation on what you're meant to do, so, you know, I had to do tests on what the law is, nobody follows the law. In Britain, I think all professional gardeners, none of them are qualified, none of them read the pesticide application rules, and they do all the wrong things, and nobody has been fined for incorrect application of pesticides. Farmers use pesticides massively in Britain, and they're not checked because they've rolled back the number of officials checking that people comply with regulations. And so we've got an environmental crisis in Britain based upon, we have got a good framework, but we have got no regulation, no implementation of the laws. And I think there are pockets where things have got a little bit better, and there are some impacts and positive movements towards making less pesticide use, but there's still loads of it going on, and they're very secretive. Like Layla said in the chat, we live in the same local area. They use glyphosate on the roads once a month. They just go around spraying glyphosate, killing everything. And they do it very carefully when, you know, I don't know if they do it in the mornings or something very early, but massive load of spraying that still happens in Britain, unfortunately.
Are there more slides? Should I go back to the slides?
Yeah, there's another one. There's the hostile reaction one. That's a good one.
Okay.
That, yeah. So so this is I'll start reading it. So there was a hostile reaction. So when the book was published, it was published in the New Yorker as it was sort of serialized in the New Yorker. And before it was serialized, the pesticide industry asked the New Yorker not to publish it. some of the advertisers withdrew, saying it was something, it was too contentious, it shouldn't be published. We know what's going on now about contentious issues. The publisher themselves had published 3 of her books already, and so the book publisher, and they were fully committed, but they were approached and people said they shouldn't publish it. They just stuck their ground. They were happy with that. But there was a massive backlash. So, and this is from Linda Lierre, who wrote and afterwards in the Penguin copy of the book that I've got, saying Rachel Carson did more than challenge the scientific establishment or force the implementation of new pesticide regulations. The hostile reaction of the establishment to Carson and her book was evidence that many government and industry officials recognized that Carson had not only challenged the conclusion of scientists regarding the benefits of new pesticides, but she had undermined their moral integrity and leadership. She had toppled America's blind faith in science. And that's good for her, good for her. But that was partly why there was and there was a huge backlash, loads of attacks on her for being things like, what did she know about future generations, because she didn't have any children herself. And she was a spinster. She didn't have a university professorship. It's not her fault she didn't have a she also hadn't been given one, and her sister had died, leaving 2 children, and her father had died. She and her mother were left looking after all 4 of them, the sister's children, the mother and Rachel. So Rachel had to get a job. So she got a job for the state's Wildlife Association, but could never get on. She could never finish her PhD. This was because of the situation of women, where, you know, if she'd been a man, she'd have probably been able to get on and have that. And them attacking her for not having a university, a PhD or a professorship is just so unfair.
Yeah, and they could never prove that anything she said was wrong. You know, even after all the congressional committees into this stuff, it's just, no, they all had to agree that she got her facts right. She was very meticulous in her research. And I mean, the copy of this book that I have, there's 50 pages of footnotes in the back, of references in the back. Like, that's how much she researched before she said anything. She really wanted to make sure that she had all the facts. So they couldn't take her down on that. They had to go after her character, which was fine. Like, she hadn't actually done anything wrong either, except be a lesbian. So
yeah. And they didn't attack her for that explicitly, did they?
No, they
because
didn't. It was very,
well,
it never came up. It was, oh, she's a spinster.
Yeah. But I suppose that might have been a code everybody knew.
Maybe, yeah. Marian, do you want to jump in? Go ahead.
You know, a lot of it is hidden. You can't prove somebody wrong on the facts, but you can move the goalposts. You can say, okay, you're right, this is toxic, but we want to use this. We think it has, you know, value for whatever purpose. So we will accept 1 in a million people getting a cancer that they would not ordinarily have got. Well, why couldn't it be 1 in 10 million or 1 in 100 million people getting a cancer they wouldn't ordinarily have got? Well, if you did that, then a lot of these toxic chemicals wouldn't be, or pesticides wouldn't be able to be used. So the decision that it's 1 in a million is really a political decision. Legislators are elected who influence who is appointed to leadership positions within environmental agencies, within Department of Agriculture, things like that. And they select the scientists on scientific advisory boards who say this is acceptable. At least I think that's how it happens. And I say that because it's a nebulous process that you don't see. It's completely not visible to the public, but somewhere along the way, the decision was made that 1 in a million extra cancers, that's acceptable. I don't think so. The American people, they probably don't think so. They don't want to be that 1 in a million. They don't want to be the 1 in 10 million, although they might accept that more. So there's a lot of stuff that happens sort of like really under the radar that has nothing to do with whether or not you agree with the science.
Is there another slide? Should I go
Yeah,
back to
there's
it?
2 more slides.
Let me
Sorry.
get on it. No,
Yeah.
it's all right. I'm fine doing it. I'm sure there's a more elegant way than what I'm doing. I just don't know what it is. So somebody's got to
Yeah.
give us lessons, right?
Yeah. Well,
Overhead projectors.
I know, right? I was
yes.
gonna say.
Yeah. Or we could just hold up bits of paper with our stuff. I'll start reading it, the
Okay,
next
here we
one.
go.
So this is a quote from Mary Daly, and this is interesting because Mary Daly wrote Gynecology in, was it 79 or something? And so this is what Mary Daly quotes a lot of Rachel Carson's other book about the oceans, and she sees her Carson's insight into nature and ecology as very important from us understanding, or that insight into us being part of nature, and the movement of nature and the interconnectedness of nature, as opposed to men's wanting to dominate and kill nature. You know, they do to nature what they do to us, to women. Anyway, this is Mary Daly speaking. Ecologists such as Barry Commoner can summarize the laws of ecology, but it is something else to intuit the deep mysteries, to spin the threads of an analysis that is constantly in touch with these mysteries. On the whole, ecologists have not been successful in following the threads of connectedness, the thread of connectedness. We have seen that female prophets such as Rachel Carson, who in 1962 warned about DDT, have, like Cassandra, gone unlistened to, even by environmentalists. It is the task of gynecologists to continue to initiate the journey into participation in the mysteries, threading our way through the dreadful labyrinthine ways beyond the maze, knotting and unknotting where necessary, following the spiral net converging toward the mystic center of creation. So I find that interesting that Mary Daly, having read a lot, sort of sees that in Carson, in her insights. So although she didn't explicitly say anything feminist, and she didn't use the term feminist, and Rachel Carson didn't say she was feminist, she had this feminist view, or what, you know, some of us would say is feminist, of what ecology is. So that's why it's a useful insight.
Marian, do you want to add anything?
No, just to encourage people, if you have not read this book, read this book. It was absolutely the foundation of the environmental movement in the United States. Some things have changed, but some things have not changed. Don't be put off by the chemistry or the science. Just kind of go with it. And if you have not read this book, read this book. Nobody would be talking about damage to the environment if it hadn't been for this book. And talk to your legislators, talk to the people you elect, and find out where they stand, and tell them it's important to you. And go outside and touch grass, and tell your kids to touch grass as well, and do it over time. There's a park. There's right across the street from there's a little like tiny mini wooded stream valley where this springs come up that form a stream that eventually goes to a larger river in my town. And there's this huge park in my town, 540 some odd acres, where that stream flows through, that I've been going to for 20 plus years. When I first went there, that stream had dozens, just bait fish galore. You could reach in the stream and just pull out a handful of little bait fish. And there are almost none of those bait fish left anymore, because of usage, because of probably a whole host of reasons. So go outside and touch grass, take your kids out there and see what happens over time. Talk to your legislatures, just read the book. It's really, it was the absolute fundamental, match that lit the environmental movement.
Right. Okay, let me go back. We've got one more slide, and I will get there. Just give me 1 second. Okay. We can do this.
Lierre, while you're getting there, I'll add. I
There.
feel it's a bit like reading Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, because as you're reading it, you can tell it was written a long time ago. And some of the science and some of the insights are not relevant so much to us today, because she was getting us up to date with what's going on in the development of pesticides and also the regulations. So there's a lot of updating to do if you are interested in it. But it's also, so it's sort of frustrating in a way, because you're thinking she's telling us the most up-to-date stuff, but she's not, because it was 1962, like de Beauvoir talking 48, I think she wrote it. It's just not up to date, and some of it's a bit boring. But she's unlike de Beauvoir, which is a bit boring. This is not boring. It's incredibly beautiful. She's a brilliant writer, and it really is worth it reading it, but bearing in mind that you have to, you know, it is very, very old-fashioned, and so it's not all completely up to date. Okay, back over to you, Lierre.
You can also just another point is you can also wander on websites. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of the Interior, the Environmental Protection Agency. Just like explore their websites and, you know, page after page after page, and see what they're saying.
All right. So this is our final slide. The question is whether any civilization can wage relentless war on life without destroying itself and without losing the right to be called civilized. These insecticides are not selective poisons. They do not single out the one species that we desire to be rid. Each of them is used for the simple reason that it is a deadly poison. It therefore poisons all life with which it comes in contact. The cat beloved of some family, the farmer's cattle, the rabbit in the field, and the horned lark out of the sky. These creatures are innocent of any harm to man. Indeed, by their very existence, they and their fellows make this life more pleasant. Yet he rewards them with a death that is not only sudden, but horrible. And then there's 2 paragraphs of some really horrible deaths, which I will not inflict on you. But the final sentence, by acquiescing in an act that can cause such suffering to a living creature, who among us is not diminished as a human being? And I think this is, you know, one of the things that really propelled her to write, was just seeing that how much horrible suffering there was, how absolutely useless it was. There was no point to any of it. And that somebody had to speak for the trees, somebody had to speak for the creatures, so she did.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, and I mean it's also so sad reading it because of all that's been lost. And I mean it reminds me of driving, well, or going on trains, seeing farmland. And that's actually a question somebody's saying, is that, has anyone done a radical feminist critique of industrial or large-scale agriculture? I mean, most of Northern Europe is huge fields and large-scale agriculture, which is almost as bad as concrete in terms of the lack of biodiversity. You sort of see these massive great fields that have been sprayed and then ploughed, and almost everything's dead, and then there's just some wheat growing. And it's I mean, I find it heartbreaking seeing agriculture. Once you know what it is, you know, once you've seen it, it's so sad. And I think it is still going on, but her insights help us to see a way forward. And you know, there's a lot of movement now to rewilding and finding different ways of providing food, but it's I think it's a really important book, and it's also sad that it's still happening. So maybe a final word from everybody. That's me finished.
She really was a prophet. She was a Cassandra. I don't know, I just feel like so much of what I've done with my life was made possible because of Rachel Carson and a few other women like her that really out of nowhere just decided to be brave and get the thing done, and they did. And then because of their work, you know, huge movements were possible that changed my life and made my life possible. So I'm eternally grateful to Rachel Carson, and I just cannot recommend enough that you read this book because it's really good. Marian, what about you?
People talk about their yards and stuff. Many of us live in apartments. If you have a yard, if you have, you know, I mean, you may have an allotment where you grow stuff because you need to grow food. But if you have a yard, let it go wild. I mean, most of my yard is just, it's wild. It's overgrown. There's brush piles. There's all kinds of greenery, and the animals that that wander through in my yard and make it their home. It's incredible. Deer and turkey and raccoons and groundhogs and birds, which attract hawks and owls and foxes. And I mean, it's they were here first. They were here first. And if I can give them my yard, a big chunk of it, it's theirs.
Okay, well, thanks very much for coming, everybody. Next week we have Julia Long talking, so that should be fantastic as well. And see you next week, or see you in the breakout rooms.